like I do, but I do, Lord, I do. I don't know why I love you like I do, but I do, Lord, I do.
Okay, so welcome everyone. If you want to hear me, you have to take your headset. I understand, like it's maybe not so out loud I can say it, but if you want to hear me, you have to put the headset on your head. So my name is Victor, and I'm developer advocate at AWS. And before I joined to AWS, I work as a DevOps engineer and manage a lot of Kubernetes clusters. Sometimes it was like, for platform engineering, when we manage and configure a Kubernetes cluster, I don't know, maybe for thousands of them, like, not thousands, okay, I'm joking, maybe hundreds of them. So before we jump into my deck, I want to ask you a question. So do you familiar with Kubernetes? Do you have Kubernetes in your production system? Please raise your hand. Okay, that's great. How much of you know what is CDK? Okay, you're prepared for the session. That's great. That's great. It's amazing. So maybe I will show you something new. I hope so. So recently I decided to figure out what's the average, how many Kubernetes cluster people deploy in their organization, and I was a little bit surprised that almost 30% of organizations decide to deploy 50 clusters in one company. So what does it mean? It means we need to manage all of this Kubernetes cluster. We have to install our components, deployments, applications, microservices, and so on. But still the question, why people decided to use Kubernetes cluster? And I see three main reasons. The first one, it's open source. With huge community, and if you have an issue with your Kubernetes cluster, most probably you can find a solution in community. If you need to scale your Kubernetes cluster to working with networking, with storage, and so on, most probably in ecosystem of Kubernetes, you will find how to do it. So, but how exactly we manage our Kubernetes cluster? How we describe what we want to see in Kubernetes cluster? And for sure, it will be YAML. You remember I am from DevOps world. I really like YAML. Some people don't like. I like YAML. So why? One of the reasons it's declarative. So I can describe what I want to achieve in my Kubernetes cluster. Like for example, hey Kubernetes, can you please deploy for me 3 pods and make sure that my containers don't have access to root file system and cannot escalate the permissions and so on. YAML is great. YAML is cool. It's static. It's very universal because if you look at other systems, you also most probably will see YAML. Like for example, in CloudFormation, or if you work with CI/CD. Also, YAML, you will find YAML as a way how you can describe what system should do. But YAML is great when it's simple, when you just like describe your first deployment, when you create your first secret in Kubernetes. But when you need to add complexity and when you're growing, when your system is growing, and when you have, I don't know, 100 of Kubernetes clusters, or as we saw currently, 50 Kubernetes clusters in one organization, it means like it can be terrible. One of the biggest problems with YAML, in my opinion, it will be copy-paste. We have just like copy some of the part of the YAML, paste in another file, and support all of these YAML files. I mentioned that Kubernetes is very popular. It has huge community, and in Kubernetes you can find many tools which can help you with this YAML help sometimes. So, and the first one, it will be customize. What's exactly customize? You describe the base of configuration, like for example, your deployment, and in the difference, like for example, for staging environment, I'm going to deploy the same deployment, like the same configurations, but with another amount of replicas. Like for staging, it will be 2. For production, I need some secret data. I need to mount my volume with secret data and also another amount of replicas. It's easy, it's simple, and it's also available out of the box in kubectl. When you work with kubectl, customize available there. That's great, but still we have to work with YAML. For me, YAML is good, but maybe some don't like YAML. So, and also in customize, you cannot do anything related to some complex conditions, like for example, if you want to deploy something specifically in different environments, it will be very difficult to implement. And Helm can do it. Helm is package manager for Kubernetes. One of the biggest benefits of the Helm, that's a Go template. In Go templates, we can do anything what we want, like conditions. Depends on the variables. And most probably, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, Helm, it's like mandatory. You install something through the Helm in your Kubernetes cluster. But we are living in a world when sometimes you build it, you run it, it's approach of DevOps area, and developers also want to understand what's going on with my applications. I'm front-end developer or I'm back-end developer, and I don't want to go to your YAML files and understand what's going on with YAML files. I want to continue to write on Python, for example, or in TypeScript, my configuration of Kubernetes. And CDK8S can help us with that. Just like a short introduction, what is CDK? CDK is a cloud development kit. So you can describe infrastructure as code, for example, CloudFormation, and working with CDK in your programming language to describe infrastructure. The same approach is applied to Kubernetes world, but with some small difference, like I will explain a little bit. So first of all, currently we support 4 main languages. It's TypeScript, Java, Python, and Go. So when we working with these languages, it means like we can avoid copy-pasting. We can do the same what we do in our standard development process. Like, for example, apply CI/CD, code review, functions, construct, for example, in a CDK8S world. And for sure, like, apply all of the best practices from software development. But how it works, like, it means like should I install something to my Kubernetes cluster to work with CDK8S? No, you don't need to do. You don't need to install anything to your Kubernetes cluster. So you work with CDK8S CLI. It will be in your local machine, or for example, you can do it in your build server. For sure, first of all, you initialize your project, write your code, like it will be standard Python code, for example, working with your construct, for example, with your objects, what you need to deliver to the Kubernetes. Then you synthesize this data, the result of your work, and it will be standard YAML file, the same what we saw previously. And this YAML file you can deliver to your Kubernetes cluster like as usual, like for example, kubectl apply, or maybe you already implement some GitOps approach with Argo CD, for example, or Flux or something else. So it's easy and it's how you can do it. So let's look at in a nutshell how it looks like from syntax perspective. So from left side you see CDKs, from right side, no, from left side, yes, the code. From right side, it's my YAML file. And you know, like when I first time saw this code, I was a little bit surprised. What's the difference? I see the same configuration, the same amount of the lines. Like, where is the benefits? Why I have to switch from YAML to CDK? And the answer, if you look carefully to this deployment, like for example, super simple Nginx deployment, yeah. How many of these lines important for us? I mean, like for developer, for me as who is going to deliver this Nginx deployment. And in reality, most of these lines, it's required for Kubernetes, like labels, metadata, name of the container. I'm care about name of the container? No, I'm not care about name of the container. Selector, match labels, all of this stuff. And in reality, we need only 2 lines of this code. And where it's CDK8S Plus as API abstraction can help us to deliver a small amount of the code, but to save the same flexibility to work with our Kubernetes cluster and with CDKs. So again, like in CDK8S Plus, I can write just like only 2 lines. It's my deployment, name Nginx, what's the container, containers Nginx, that's it. So that's how it works in CDK8S Plus API abstractions. But there is a question like, can I manage my AWS resources? For example, I'm going to deploy some application, web application, yeah? And I need some data layer, like for example, DynamoDB, or maybe RDS, or maybe S3, or something else. There's a question, can I manage my AWS resources inside in Kubernetes ecosystem? And I believe you know the answer. For sure, it's yes. It's AWS controller for Kubernetes. It's ACK. Currently, it's supported in general available 14 services, if I right remember. Some of them is currently in preview. In total, it's around 30 services supported. And it's very important, like I highlighted, supported versions. It means like you have to install separate controller for every service. So for example, if you are going to work with RDS, how I'm going to show in my demo, I have to install controller for RDS. If I need to work with DynamoDB, it will be needed a separate controller for DynamoDB. And the most important part of ACK that I can manage my AWS infrastructure without interact with other services like CloudFormations. So it means like my Kubernetes cluster will directly communicate with API in AWS. So there is no any CloudFormations layer or something else. So Kubernetes, through the custom resource definitions, which we will see just like, I believe, in a couple slides, we'll say to AWS API, hey, can you please create for me RDS with this configuration? So how I can start together like CDKs and controllers. So first of all, as I mentioned, you have to install controller in your Kubernetes cluster. Again, like for separate service, separate controller. And just to remind you, 30 service currently supported. The next one is related to API permissions, IAM permissions. Previously, before reInvent 2023, you have to configure the IRSA or IDC provider, expose, connect to your IAM role. Currently, my recommendation will be to use pod identity. Much easier, faster, so you just install additional pod in your Kubernetes cluster, and you can create the matching between IAM and service account in your Kubernetes cluster. Why we need it? We need to provide the right permissions for our Kubernetes to create the resources which we are going to manage through the controller. The next one, you have to import CRD, custom resource definition, inside in my Kubernetes cluster. So when you install ACK, you can do it through the Helm chart, and it will install all of the resources, what you need, like for this controller. But you also can manually just like import exactly separate CRD, just like if you need it. And like manage as usual as you do, for example, for Kubernetes deployment, you can manage other resources in AWS. But how we can make it a little bit easier and faster in our situation? I mean, like you write in the code like Python or TypeScript. So, and the answer will be code assistant, code whisper in my situation. So, Amazon provide a huge functionality from Code Whisperer. One of the main purpose why I decided to use Code Whisperer currently supported for CDK, has a little bit limitations to support only TypeScript in Python for today, but in general I see like in the future we will have more and more languages supported for CDK, and also during the demo I will show you how in this configuration the Code Whisperer helped me to speed up the process of writing the code. One of the main reasons why I decided to use also Code Whisperer is not only to generate the code, but also to help me, for example, make sure that I don't have some security issue with my code. Or, for example, I don't reuse some open source code which can be has limitation of the license and so on. You can enable it in Code Whisperer. Okay, I believe that's it for like theoretical part, and it's time to not like to speak about something, but to show something. So let me just like explain what we are going to do. So as team, we already finished development of our web application. It will be very simple two-tier application. Why I say two-tier? Because I have a web layer and I have some data layer, and in the middle it will be my cache. So as we already know ACK controllers, I decided to move outside of my Kubernetes cluster data layer. So I'm going to use RDS for this configuration. So looks super simple, but as usual, we have additional requirements. What's the requirements? The first requirement is high availability. So from RDS perspective, it sounds like super easy. You just like need to enable multi-easy configuration, and that's it. So RDS will do it for us because it's managed service. But what about my deployments in Kubernetes with my web layer, cache layer, how I can do it? So I can say for Kubernetes, can you please scale to, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 7 replicas? But I cannot guarantee by default without additional configuration that all of these deployments, all of these pods will be put in the same node. So it looks like not very good from high availability perspective, because in case if I lost this node, I will lose the whole of my applications. So what I can do, I can define affinity, anti-affinity, node selector, and make sure that I spread web pods, for example, for every node only one web pod, for every node one cache node. But at the same time, I got another requirement, and this requirement sounds like we have to put web layer and cache layer as close as possible to avoid network latency communications between different nodes. So how I can do it? I can put it together in one node. So it's my requirements for these applications. High availability, spread between different nodes, but at the same time, web and cache should be in one place. We are moving on. For sure, I have to expose my web layer. It will be publicly available, so it means like I need to connect load balancer, for example, in Kubernetes, for example, in IaC, and if I create load balancer as a service, it will create for me load balancers, like super easy. But for cache layer, I need to create internal service, how I expose this cache layer to provide communication from web to the cache. And the last one, for sure, I have to set up network policy or network isolation. You're familiar with Kubernetes. I saw a lot of hands was right. So when we create a namespace for us did not provide any security functionalities. Like it's a logical bucket where we put all of our resources. To isolate our resources in Kubernetes, we have to create network policy. So I want to make sure that only web layer can communicate it with cache layer, nobody else. I don't want to be in situations that other applications, or for example from staging, I connect to my cache layer and get the data from production data layer. So I believe it's a good time to switch to my Visual Studio Code. It will be pre-recording demo. Why? One of the reasons, because first of all, I wanted to speed up some of the process and highlighted what is the most important. But before we start to write any code, so currently I have prerequisite for my demo. What this means like, first of all, when you initialize your CDK8S project, you will see almost the same. But we remember that I'm going to work with RDS. So it means like I already imported my controller and how I can interact, how I can manage my AWS resources inside in Kubernetes. So here we go. You can see the TypeScript realizations for RDS controller. And currently, I create a namespace which is available, and also inside in this namespace, which currently we will see how it looks like. So from left side, it's from right side, yeah. From right side, you see my TypeScript. From left side, it's my YAML file. And let's double check how many resources currently do we have in my Kubernetes namespace, which I recreated. So no any pods, looks good. For demo purpose, I decided to store my password for RDS in Kubernetes secrets. Again, wanted to highlight it and mention one more time, Kubernetes secrets by default doesn't provide secure storage. You have to encrypt somehow your Kubernetes secrets, or the better way, and my recommendation will be to store your secret outside of Kubernetes. For example, in Secret Manager. So also you see that I did Helm list of all Helm charts which I installed in my Kubernetes cluster, and currently it's only ACK with RDS controller in ACK system namespace. And let's double check which of CRD currently available in my Kubernetes cluster. One more time, just like you have to install CRD. For example, if you're working with Helm, like as I did, it will be applied and installed in your Kubernetes cluster automatically. So RDS CRD available, and I believe it's a good time to start our application. So where we are currently? So we finished with prerequisites. So it looks like Kubernetes cluster is available. We install ACK. We prepare our initial code for CDK8S, and we're ready to start to write definitions for RDS. So let's do it. And yeah, here we go. So when I work with ACK, it means like I can describe in the same manner, the same objects, how I did, for example, for my deployments. Like, for example, in my case, it is going to be RDS, and I just like provide the configurations. What is the engine? Postgres. What's the version of this database? 14 for sure. What's the instances? I'm going to select Graviton instance. It's our ARM-based instances. One of the reasons for sure it's cost-effective, but another one is sustainability. And Graviton instance is more sustainable compared to traditional processors. So also I defined what my username will be, my password, where I'm going to store this password, and how I will interact, how I can get these credentials after I run my application. But also when I create this RDS instance, I need to provide somehow configuration for my cache layer, how to find where is base my RDS location, where base my RDS instances. So in Kubernetes world, you can do it again through the secrets, or for example through the config map. So I decided to use config map for this demo. But I need somehow to get this data. Currently, I don't know what the instance will be, name of the instance, what's the port, what's the username, and so on. And I have to store this information somehow in config map. In CDK8S, you can use export field, which I currently will write, db host export. And I will take this data exactly from AWS API when I will deliver, when I install and deploy RDS, and take the value, like what the db host name is, and put it to my config map. And after that, when we will work with cache layer, I will use the same config map to provide the connectivity to my database layer. So you see sometimes like it's appeared recommendations or what can be from Code Whisperer, but most of the time I just like accept line by line. And currently, I will be very honest with you, like it's supported a little bit, not so much. But when we will switch into the next configuration, I mean, like currently I'm working on db host export, and when I will switch to, for example, db port, Code Whisperer understands the whole of the context in my file, currently understands what I'm doing. Like I need currently provides the functionality, gets data from AWS, from JSON configurations, like an API version, and stored in config map. And currently I just accept line by line, make sure this is exactly what I need. And you know what interesting part, that Code Whisperer great, did his job with port, but what about the name of user? Because from JSON perspective, like where we store username, it's another schema, it's another place, it's another location. But still, Whisper did amazing job, like, and provided the right configuration where is based my username for my database. Here we go. So I done with ACK describe my RDS database. Currently, what I did, I just like synthesize these changes, and we see from again for you, it's from left side, it's my TypeScript. From right side, it's my YAML. You see where I base like my configuration, again like Postgres, how it's realized and how it looks like from YAML perspective in manifest. You see that I created config map, and it's create the same object in my manifest. So it's how you can troubleshoot and work with CDK. Just generate your code and see how it looks like from YAML perspective. Again, like my different field exports, which is needed to provide the right configuration and connection to my databases. So it looks like I'm done with bottom layer. I'm done with my RDS layer, and it's a good time just like to switch into the next layer, and it will be a cache. Cache. One small point that's you saw currently only CDK8s. No, it was no CDK8s Plus, because CDK8s Plus currently supported only native resources in Kubernetes. If you're working with ACK or some other custom resources, most probably you have to work with CDK8s, not CDK8s Plus. But currently we are switching to the next layer, and it will be a cache layer. And in the cache layer, for sure, it will be deployment. And let's write the code. So first of all, before to provide definitions of my deployment, I need to create where I'm going to place this deployment. What kind of node I prefer to use it. And for web and cache layer, I'm going to use memory optimized node. It will help me to make sure that I put on the right type of the node my application. So, and it's a time to create a deployment. So again, Code Whisper a little bit helped me what I'm going to do. So it's a cache, and just like in a few seconds we saw it's generated for me. It's a deployment, like the whole deployment for cache. But currently, Code Whisper don't know what exactly I'm going to do. I didn't provide any, like some context, what I want to achieve and so on. So for that reason, I'm going to apply only line by line when I am I know this what exactly I needed. So let's move on. So in containers, for sure, I need to provide my images. Code Whisper again propose for me Redis, good choice, but in our custom application is going to be a cache. Port number for sure, and environment variables. Again, we remember cache communicate with RDS. And ACK, when we create ACK, we also did field export to store this data about connectivity to my RDS. And currently, I just describe how to get this data from a config map. Again, for the first line, when I work with DB host, mostly I have to write by myself the whole connectivity, but the second line, Code Whisper generated for me is really exactly what I want to achieve. So just I can accept or do some modifications. In my situations, I'm going to accept. The next line, for sure, it will be the same. It's a DB user, how I can connect it, what's the user I'm going to use, and so on. So the next part, it will be related to our requirements. Requirements, what we have. First of all, it's highly availability. So it means we need at least 2 replicas, and we also have to spread these pods between different nodes. In CDK8 Plus, I just say spread true, like a flag. Please do for me spread between different nodes. Also, we remember about network isolations. I said isolate true, that's it. So currently, I need to say where I'm going to schedule this node, to provide the right direction for Kubernetes scheduler, where and how to put my pods and my memory nodes. And the last one, for sure, I have to expose my cache deployment. It will be cluster IP. By default, as you can see, I didn't provide any type of service, and by default, it will be cluster IP. Again, let's synthesize these changes and see, I would say, a little bit of the magic, how much lines we written already in TypeScript and how much lines it will be generated, synthesized when we run CDK8 scenes. So like, let me scroll a little bit, and here we go. You see from one side it's around maybe 20 lines of the code for my cache deployment to spread with network policy, replicas, config map connections, and so on. And you see how it's exactly created definitions in YAML, for example, schedule on some specific node, not affinity. Good example. What else do we have here? We said spread between different nodes. Again, pod anti-affinity. Make sure that I don't put many pods in one node, so it's not what I wanted based on my requirements. What else do we have? I have environment variables, like it's here, how I can get it. I can get from my config. That's how it's synthesized from left side to the right side, from my TypeScript to the YAML. Also, you can see that I have some additional lines of the code, like security context. We did not specify this one in my CDK8 Plus configurations. So it means like CDK8 Plus also follow security best practices, architecture best practices, and it will create it for you based on the recommendations. Make sure, for example, don't provide access to your root file system or escalate your permissions and so on. Isolate, true, we create a network policy. I am, as a developer, not need to be an expert, just like to provide a flag, please make isolate these applications, and that's it. And for sure, it's a service layer, how I expose internally my cache layer. So, where we are currently from my fancy diagram perspective. So we done with RDS, we done with cache layer, and the final step, it will be the web layer. Again, let's back to Visual Studio and finish with deployment for web layer. So currently, I just like create a deployment, and again, Code Whisperer analyze the whole context of my file, understand maybe in this situation you want to do in this way, because previously the recommendations was like super standard, super base, but currently it's based on what I already did, and mostly it's what exactly I want to achieve. But for example, port number for me, it will be not 80 as by default, but 6000, and you see currently I make a reference how to connect to my cache layer, what's the host name, what's the port. This data I take from service, which I exposed previously. And the next one for sure, again, like is amount of the replicas, isolate, spread, the same. What we remember also, we remember that we have to provide connectivity from web layer to the cache layer. So network policy. We need to create and say, hey, please allow connections from web layer to the cache layer. Also, we remember that we have requirements to make sure that we put together web layer and cache layer in one physical node, like one EC2 instances. So I did it like collocate is configuration, and just like in a few seconds we will see how it's realized in YAML file. The last actions what I'm currently working, it's service type, like expose again, and it will be load balancer, and it like will create for me load balancer inside in AWS and provide accessibility for external users. Again, let's synthesize our changes from TypeScript, for example, to my YAML file and see what the changes we will see in a YAML file. So let's open again like left side, right side, scroll a little bit to find where is my web deployment. Again, it will be absolutely almost the same what we did for cache layer, like network policy, again, isolate. But let's see what's the difference. I said, for example, create for me, just like 1 second, please make sure that you put it together in one node, collocate, and you see in port affinity, it created separate sections to make sure that these two ports will be in the same node. For me as a developer, like I am backend developer or front-end developer right on TypeScript, I'm not familiar with your Kubernetes stuff. I can just like to write a code, collocate together, and that's it. So what else I have? The same related to security context. Again, make sure that you don't provide access to your root system, escalate permissions. It's a good point. And also, I said from network policy perspective, please create network policy, because when we say isolate, by default in Kubernetes, we remember it create default network policy. And don't allow any connections. But currently, I said, please allow from web to the cache. And again, I'm not expert in Kubernetes, and it's create exactly how I needed my network policy. The last one is load balancer. As you can see, it also understands what's the port number, all of the configurations, what we provide in TypeScript. Looks good. I believe we're ready to just apply these changes. So one more time, when you work with CDK8 you don't need any external resources installed in your Kubernetes cluster. You work locally, like in your workstations, laptop, and so on, or for example, on your CI/CD build server. And you can apply all of your approaches what you currently use, like CI/CD or Git flow, like up to you. So what I'm currently want to see, I'm not going to show like it's how it works. It's a demo version. I believe you understand cache images, web images does not exist. But what I want to show you is what's the status of my RDS instance. So we use ACK controller, like AWS controller for Kubernetes, and let's double check what's the current status of my RDS instance and how it's created from Kubernetes. One more time, one of the biggest benefits of ACK is that you directly communicate with AWS API, and the single source of truth of your AWS resources will be your Kubernetes cluster. Make sure that you store backups of your Kubernetes, of etcd, and how you make upgrade of your Kubernetes cluster. So you see my RDS is currently creating in my region, specified account, and so on. Looks good. So that's what we did, like we create our applications, but as usual, how it's commonly happened, our application stays very popular, and the next requirement is make this application scalable. Scalable, it means like add additional amount of the pods. How we can do it in Kubernetes? Horizontal pod autoscaler, great mechanism to do it. But what about resources for my Kubernetes cluster? Comforter, it's my favorite choice because it provides just-in-time exactly required resources, cost-saving. Highly recommend to look at the solutions. It's again also open source. So, but Comforter distributed through the Helm. And there is a question, should I install Helm package separately outside of my CDK configuration, or I can integrate to my CDK code? And the answer, for sure, you can integrate your CDK code. For example, how it will be looks like installation of the Comforter, what's the chart location, what's the version, what's the parameters, and so on. And the latest changes will be update my web layer, for example. The same I have to do it also for cache layer. I have to delete amount of replicas, which I statically defined previously, like 2. It was here. I delete it and create a separate resource, horizontal pod autoscaler with minimum replicas 2, and that based on CPU average utilization, I add additional resource. So let's summarize what we learned today, like how we can work with CDK8 Plus. So first of all, CDK8, it's multi-language software development framework. It's open source. You don't need to install anything to your Kubernetes cluster. You work with CDK8 CLI in your workstations. You make synthesis of your changes on the code, like for example in TypeScript, Go, Python, and so on, and see how it's implemented in YAML file. CDK8 Plus, amazing library provided for you abstraction layer on your CDK code, and you can create easier and faster with less amount of the code, the same resources with deployment, for example, all of the objects what inside in Kubernetes out of the box. Does not support CRDs. CRDs, it's separate. I believe you understand, but CDK8 Plus is amazing if you need to work just with your internal Kubernetes configuration. ACK, AWS controller for Kubernetes. You can manage your AWS resources without touching cloud formations or deploy through the cloud formation somehow, directly communicate with AWS API. Again, it's a single source of truth of the whole of your application will be in your Kubernetes cluster, in your etcd configuration. And the last one, for sure, try to play with Code Whisperer. It's really help not only to write some business logic of the code, like in the Python, but currently, recently we announced support for CDK. Code Whisperer officially supported for TypeScript and for Python. Please try, it's an amazing tool when you're working with the code. If you want to try by yourself, and my recommendation for sure, make your hands dirty. First of all, the first QR code will be directly you to CDK8, where you can find more information, example, and so on. And the second QR code, that is a demo what I showed you. I understand maybe it was a little bit fast. Maybe it was not so easy to understand because I spoke and maybe you focused not on the you didn't understand how this works, so you can try by yourself. And for sure, if you have you feel like I need more information about not only CDK but about also AWS, highly recommend to join to our community, because when I mention why Kubernetes is so popular, because community. In AWS, we have a community.aws. You can find a lot of information and our official YouTube channel, AWS for Developers. And if you want to systemize your knowledge, Skill Builder can help you. And for sure, I will really appreciate if you leave your feedback in the applications, evaluate my sessions, write some, I don't know, what you like, what you don't like, and maybe a recommendation for the next sessions. Thank you very much.
Every time I look into your eyes, every time I see this age, every time I look into those eyes, I contemplate in blue like crystal falling on, and all I see